You know, I was thinking, the expansion is out in about a month, right? The most likely question every player interested in going into Shadowlands is, what spec should I play? What should I main? There are some people who are already decided they are a melee DPS main, they're just trying to choose between Warrior and Death Knight, and then other people who are completely in the fucking sky. They don't even know which role they're playing, let alone the class or the spec. They're probably going to go around on YouTube, on Twitch, maybe Reddit, maybe some class discords, trying to ask around and get someone to tell them what they should play. Either because they're lazy, or because they don't trust their own judgment, or because they don't even have the beta because they are plebs. So that's where I come in, to save the day. If you are a PvE player, because this is a PvE friendly channel, my friends. Not because I hate PvP, but because I don't have the audacity to make videos about PvP when the last time I PvP'd was in TBC, which means half of you guys weren't even born. Therefore, we're gonna be focused about PvE in these videos. A series of videos where we look at which spec should you go for if you want to main it in Shadowlands. I could have obviously dragged it on, making multiple videos about multiple activity in the game. Your main spec if you want to raid, your main spec if you want to do Mythic Blast. Main spec Torghast player only. But instead I'm gonna try to condense it to one, because as we know, there is a pretty good chance that if you like to Mythic Plus, you also raid, or vice versa. But we have to try to find a middle ground. I'm gonna have to employ my big brain, extremely big brain, to try to come with a satisfying solution for everyone. And this is gonna be by no means a tier list, or a rating, or a ranking, even though you guys love that shit. Predicting what the tier list is gonna be and then argue what the correct list was supposed to be. I mean, I like it too, but in this case, it's just an open talk. It's just a random chat where we exchange opinions about which classes could be the more prominent, prevalent, and popular in the upcoming expansion and are gonna be fit to do both activities, Mythic Plus and raids. What could they be good at? What could they be weak at? Why would they be chosen for the raids and why would they not be chosen for Mythic Plus or vice versa? As you know, different activities are going to have different priorities. For example, movement is much more important in a raid setting than it is in a Mythic Plus, and crowd control is much more important in a Mythic Plus setting than it is in a raid setting. Not only that, but certain things sometimes, such as survivability of a tank, are actually much more enhanced in a Mythic Plus setting where they can draw power from multiple enemies hitting them, as opposed to raids, where they are most of the time dealing with a single enemy hitting them. Same can be said for the perceived strength of a DPS spec, when it comes to doing damage and the damage profile, single target or AoE or cleave and whatnot, and the same can be said for healers. Rolling heals over time that you can cast on the move and allow you to DPS is obviously very prevalent and valuable in Mythic Plus for a Resto Druid, but much less in a raid environment. So the values can change, the priority of these specs can change in the different types of content. So we're gonna be having a look at all of that, and we're gonna be starting with tank, because the intro is already long. I had to explain all of this, and the tanks are the shortest one to do in a single video, so we're gonna go with tanks first. Well, class, the argument of the day is going to be tanks. Right off the bat, tanks have a unique thing to them as opposed to some of the DPS specs, which is that they have no backup plan. They are not a mage, a rogue, a warlock, a hunter, a warrior. When you choose your main for Shadowlands and you choose a tank, you have no backup. If your tank is underpowered, you're stuck there. If your tank has been nerfed, you're stuck there. You either wait for Blizzard to unstuck it, or you have to reroll to something else. This goes for all tanks, because Blood DK, Protection Paladin, Protection Warrior, Brewmaster Monk, Guardian Druid, and Vengeance Demon Hunter are the only tank spec in their class. Talking about class, in this classroom, is there someone who would like to tell me some of the main differences between a Mythic Plus tank and a raid tank? What are the things that you would look for in a raid tank than you would otherwise not really look for in a Mythic Plus tank, and vice versa? I heard some good answers. One of the key answers, I'm gonna go right off the bat, this is the 50-point answer, is DPS. Maybe you've gotten your perception skewed by the recent evolution of tanks equipped with Twilight Devastation, but in general, the important thing of Mythic Plus for tanks is DPS, when for raiding is not. Raiding has never valued tank DPS that highly. It has never been a core part of a tank toolkit that has made them picked over other tank specs purely because of their damage, whereas for Mythic Plus, one of the entire reasons why Protection Warrior became nearly over 55% of all high keys picks for nearly 2 seasons was because of their damage. Brewmaster Monk was always more tanky than a Protection Warrior, yet Protection Warrior was the star of Mythic Plus, because damage is very important. I don't know if you know this, scientists came up with a research a while ago. They actually figured out that if you kill enemies quicker, they will hit you less times and do less damage. I didn't believe this at first, but it turns out to be true. If you kill them faster, they don't have the time to do damage to you. Therefore, tanking is devalued and damage is valued more. It's incredible. And for this reason, we have our first schism between tanks. This is the first divide you can see between Mythic Plus and raiding when it comes to the choice of your tank. So going a little bit more in detail on each tank, Vengeance Demon Hunter, as mentioned, being one of the tanks with the highest DPS, is going to be in my tier list that is not a tier list. See it more as a personality test, where the top is Mythic Plus focused and the bottom is raid focused, while the middle is the good balance between the two. Demon Hunter is basically going to be almost out of the picture, all the way to the top, as Mythic Plus focused. Demon Hunter has some very strong things for both raids and Mythic Plus. Unfortunately, they get stopped at the starting point by their core design. They have very good mobility and also very good CC with their list of chains available to them. But the key thing that brings them so close to being a Mythic Plus focused spec is their Shatter Souls. The fact that they get souls when enemies die. Guess where enemies die? Mythic Plus. Guess where enemies don't die? A 7-minute long single target sequence in a Mythic raid encounter. That's where they don't die. And that's the crutch and the doom of Vengeance Demon Hunter. They can't properly tank bosses because they don't get enough souls. The other problem of Demon Hunters for tanking in raids is that their active mitigation is the worst in all tanks. Demon Spikes is terrible. It has been buffed a little bit, but their 1200 something armor increase and 15% parry is a terrible active mitigation to use. And what's worse is their cooldown is too long. Demon Hunter has been, since Legion, the premier tank to be one-shot by a boss, because they couldn't keep up their active mitigation when it was needed. Demon Hunter has always cheated this by their core mechanic of healing. I don't think that was supposed to be their core mechanic. I think when people figured out and wondered what the fuck is this, Blizzard just pretended it was intended, because it works in Mythic Plus due to the massive amount of souls they can get, due to the kiting and various CC, stuns, snares and whatnot they can apply, which help them mitigate the amount of damage they are doing and mitigate the windows where they don't have active mitigation. But in a raid encounter, a raid boss is not going to let that fly. A raid boss is going to still smack you. There is no CC that's going to work on that, so Demon Hunter really feels that when that happens in raids. So if you want to main a Vengeance Demon Hunter, please be warned that it is likely going to be way more effective in a Mythic Plus environment than it is going to be in a raid. This comes from what I have seen in Shadowlands so far, but also what I've seen in the past 4 years, and what you have seen in the past 4 years, and simply how prevalent Demon Hunter has been in raids compared to how much it has been in Mythic Plus. Now, students, I already told you the first key thing for Mythic Plus, which is going to be damage done, and now we have one of the key things for raids, which is movement. Being able to move quickly and often is not something that is as important in Mythic Plus compared to raids. This is admittedly more important for melee DPS, range DPS and healers than it is for tanks, as most of the mechanics that will require you to move are not going to be tank related. But tanks still have to move around. Maybe not as much as they had to in Zakul or in the whole Ring Around the Rosie during N'Zoth, but they do have to move. And another thing they need to have is crowd control when it comes to Mythic Plus instead. So to me, Blood DK is one of the first good balance, good for everything tank, despite the fact that they have the worst movement of all tanks and the worst crowd control of all tanks. Well, that makes no sense. Well, first of all, what they do have is a unique crowd control. This is similar to Brewmaster Monk. You can start talking about stuns, snares, roots, disorients, interrupts, blinds, but then things like Mass Grip and things like Ring of Peace are going to be limited to just 2 classes and no one else. Blood Death Knight is the one that has Mass Grip. Yes, the only other thing they have is a single grip and a single stun, and that's it. They don't have anything else. They can talent into a slow for the death and decay, and they have a single silence. Their list of crowd control is very bare bones. It's very limited, but the effectiveness that they can gain in Mythic Plus from Mass Grip nearly makes up from having 3 to 4 to 5 different crowd control pieces. A Typhoon and an Ursul's Vortex and a Cyclone. All 3 combined, they're probably not as crucial as a single Mass Grip. And to this you have to also apply the extreme self-dependency that Blood Death Knight has. When you are thinking about playing a main, when you're thinking about what to choose, I would suggest you, and I'm curious about what you guys think, is to play Blood DK, particularly if you are a solo player. if you are a pug player, if you don't plan on much of any pre-planned, pre-made content, be it raids or Mythic Plus, because Blood Death Knight is the tank that requires the least amount of help from other healers. When it comes to raids, you are nearly self-sufficient. The only thing you will be asking for is externals. Most of the other time you won't even require to be healed. When it comes to Mythic Plus, it is similar. You can heal yourself. That's your defense mechanism. This is why healers like Resto Druid go so well with a Blood Death Knight, because they just roll some healing over time on them, and then they go into cat form and do extra DPS. But they are very deceptive at first, because you look at them, they are a fat sack of shit, they can't fucking move, they are useless, they can't even stun properly, but they are actually very strong, particularly when you want to solo. Death Knight is not just a good balanced tank for both activities, but they are also the best solo tank. If you don't want to have social contact and talk to other human beings, understandable, Death Knight is gonna be the suitable choice for you. Now, looking at Protection Warrior, trying to stay a little bit away from the sadness of their current state, maybe looking at them a little bit more holistically, a little bit more from the top-down view in general. Protection Warrior is definitely still the more old-school tank. Protection Warrior, to me, fits more in the raid tank category than it does in Mythic Plus. Don't be tricked by the fact that they have been turned mid-expansion into the Mythic Plus machine that it has become in BFA due to the band-aid systems and borrowed powers that Blizzard gave a dead spec to try to revive it, turning it into an unkillable machine. But this is no longer the case. Most of that is gone now, so we have to look at different things. Some of the things they still retain, which makes them the default, standard, classic choice for raid tanking for like 15 years. Although it has changed over time, but some of the choices they have are still very tuned towards raiding. You know, Last Stand, for example, increasing your HP in a raid environment with 4, 5, 3 healers is more powerful than it does in a Mythic Plus setting. You have Shield Wall, which is a 50% damage reduction. 50% DR is massive for a tank, especially if it's on a 4-minute cooldown. This is worse than if you were tanking a Mythic Plus as a Death Knight and you have like 7 different possible cooldowns you can choose from Icebound Fortitude to Vampiric Plug, you know, Rune Weapon, Anti-Magic Shell, but now all as shorter cooldowns, but instead Warrior is the old school boomer. They've got a 3 and a 4-minute cooldown. These longer massive cooldowns are more tuned for raiding, because raiding is gonna have those spikes of damage where the tank needs to require externals. Sometimes they can be used, because they are much stronger, they can be used to take an extra stack of an ability or an extra hit of a boss ability that they otherwise wouldn't be able to take, because their DR is so strong. The fact that their Ignore Pain can be used to block any type of damage because it's an absorb also helps in these situations. If you're a druid, for example, you can increase your armor. If you're a demon hunter, you can increase your armor, and that's it. If you take magical damage, you have to heal yourself, or you have to hope to be healed by the healer. But if you're a warrior, Ignore Pain is going to help you either way. They still have great mobility. They have Heroic Leap, they have Charge, and they have Intervene. They still retain their Shout for attack power buff, which is going to be obviously stronger in raid environments, as well as their Rallying Cry, which is also going to be stronger in a raid environment as a raid CD for their healers to use and combine with others. So this toolkit is just the standard default classic, old school, I don't know how many synonyms I can use for being a raid tank. If the class was tuned properly, they would actually be a pretty strong raid tank. So if you were more interested in a Protection Warrior as your main, I do believe they are better as a tank for raids than they are for Mythic Plus. In general, just don't expect the same level of madness you saw at the end of BFA. Actually, from the mid of BFA to the end, because that's not the case, at least right now, on the first tier, we could say. So just keep that in mind. I can understand if you're a little bit worried thinking about maining a Guardian Druid. When we talk about Vengeance has been OP every expansion release because they are very overstated. They scale poorly. They used to scale poorly, so they did very well at the start. So now you're thinking it's going to be the same. Blood Decay has been strong since forever, so you want to go safe and take a Blood Decay. We talk about Warrior. Maybe you have been blindsided by how strong they are at the end of BFA, or maybe you're a boomer and you know that you're safe picking Warrior for being a raid tank. But when it comes to Guardian, you know, the fasts of Legion are kind of gone now for a while. So now you're kind of a little bit more wary and worried about thinking about playing Guardian. You're like, yeah, I like it, but what if it's shit again? I'm gonna be soothing some of your worries. I think Guardian Druid has been improved as a tank. I am putting them closer to being a raid tank than it is a Mythic Plus tank, mostly because one of the things that they have not to be improved their weakness of lack of self-healing and lack of self-defense past their damage reduction. Other specs like Blood Decay, Vengeance have ways to heal themselves. But Druid, the combination of having no defense against magical damage and the fact that they aren't really self-sufficient is kind of going to hurt them a little bit more in Mythic Plus than it does in Raids. In Raids you have healers to bail you out, in Mythic Plus you only have one. It's a little bit harder. Also, as I mentioned, Mythic Plus damage is very important. One of the slight weaknesses that Druid has is having to drop some survivability in exchange for doing more damage, which is also going to make them slightly weaker in Mythic Plus, something that they don't have to worry about in Raids. There are several improvements, from Incarnation Guardian of Ursoc being a much stronger defensive now for them, Barskin being buffed in cooldown reduced, their Shield Wall, Survival Instincts being buffed in cooldown reduction, their newly reworked Pulverize now working as a 20% damage reduction for 10 seconds on a single target is also gonna be extremely strong on single target boss fights where you want to mitigate a huge hit and a little bit harder to take a good advantage of when you compare it in a Mythic Plus situation. To me though, overall they are still very versatile and definitely improved compared to BFA. I wouldn't tell you to pick Guardian Druid and be certain they're gonna be good. I don't want you to blame me, but I would say there is a much higher chance compared to BFA that they're going to be viable and strong in both Raid and Mythic Plus environment. So if you wanted to pick Guardian Druid for a while, but you were also kind of worried that you didn't see too many Guardian Druids, you didn't think it was that strong, then Shadowlands is the time to go all in and try. And then fail and reroll to Brewmaster. We know how it goes, but whatever. Now we have Protection Paladin. Protection Paladin always felt to me like the guy who was just one step from being one of the best. He was like, yeah, who's strong in Raids? Oh yeah, well, Brewmaster is strong. What about Paladin? Yeah, they're strong, but not quite. What about Mythic Plus? What about Paladin DPS? Oh yeah, they have pretty good DPS, but not just like Warrior. What about defense? Yeah, they can heal themselves, but not just quite Blood DKs. They don't change that much in Mythic Plus when it comes to that stereotype, although now they do have massive amount of damage currently that they can do in Mythic Plus, which is probably what is going to make them viable and one of the prime choices by default, purely because of the damage. However, some of the changes regarding Paladins in general, therefore protection as well, is the fact that now they have to spend all the power on all of their finishers, tanks included. So their mitigation is going to be Shield of the Righteous for armor and Word of Glory for a heal, and that is going to no longer have a cooldown. This is currently making Protection Paladin pretty strong. I don't know if there's going to be any sort of nerfs, but it's pretty strong because the holy power generation is plentiful. It's essentially much faster than if you had to wait for the cooldown of that ability. The cooldown of the recharges of your Shield of the Righteous, or the, what was that, 15-second cooldown of your Light of the Protector. Now it's just much faster. You can effectively use your heal, use 3 GCDs and use your heal again. I believe Protection Paladin is going to be closer to being a stronger Mythic Plus spec. I believe they're strong in either option, but if I really had to choose purely because of the current damage that they have and some of the reworked abilities working much better in Mythic Plus, Blessed Hammer working on all damage taken is very strong in Mythic Plus from all the minor hits you're going to be taking from tiny enemies. You have First Avenger, which is also insane in Mythic Plus. Their defensives and shenanigans are still valuable and viable in Raids from their big DR, Guardian of the Ancient Kings, big boomer 5-minute cooldown ability, but they still have their Lay on Hands, they still have their shield and their Blessing of Protection, second shield. I believe if I were thinking about maining a tank, Protection Paladin would also be a safe choice for me. If it came to wanting to do both Mythic Plus and Raid tanking, I think they are very versatile, but not in the same way we were talking about it in Legion and BFA. Like, yeah, they are very versatile, but below 1 or 2 or 3 tank specs. Oh yeah, they're very versatile, but they're not as good as this and this and this in Mythic Plus. I think they are versatile, but also very solid. So we will be finishing with Brewmaster Monk, because it's the fastest to go through. Brewmaster Monk is the best and most complete tank if you wanted to choose a main tank for both Raiding and Mythic Plus. Brewmaster Monk has been improved coming into Shadowlands from BFA, so if you were worried that they would get changed, or if you were interested and you already played them in BFA, then they are the same, or actually stronger. Their boring maintenance Iron Skin Brew is now cooked into their kit. You're now essentially always going to have 100% effectiveness on your stagger. What really has changed is that your guard, after being taken away from you, put into a talent tree, never used, it has now been taken away from talent trees and given to you back, baseline. This time it's called Lesser Brew, and it's gonna give you an Absorb Shield. To top this all off, Expel Harm now also gives you a small base heal on just a 5-second cooldown, plus extra heals by consuming healing spheres near you. This is particularly strong because one of the biggest problems of Brewmaster Monk, as I mentioned already in this tier with Guardian Druid, is the fact that they have no way to heal themselves. Once people got past their Purifying Stagger, it's not that they could do anything else. They had their Fortifying Brew on a 7-minute cooldown, and even then it was mediocre. Now they've also been helped with Touch of Death. Touch of Death baseline on Brewmaster helps them clear Stagger based on the damage it does. This is pretty much a guaranteed full Stagger reset on Brewmaster when they use it. And now with the combination of Expel Harm healing and Celestial Brew Absorb shielding, they even have some ways to actually heal themselves and prevent damage that they didn't have before outside of Stagger. If you pair to this all the other toolkits, all the other things they have in their toolkit, from their Blackhawk statue that can be very useful and very helpful in multiple scenarios, or Ring of Peace, one of the cheat mechanics you can use in both Raids and Mythic Plus for multiple mob AI mindfuckery. Their utility and mobility is still great. They have excellent mobility for Raids. Their utility with the Ring of Peace, with the AoE stun, with paralysis. Now they even have Clash baseline. They're just filled with stuff. I don't know about you guys, but I believe it is going to be a foolproof tank that you can choose for either Raids or Mythic Plus, whether you're interested in both or just one of the two. It's very safe to go Brewmaster Monk. And that was the last of the tanks. We are now done with our chat, talking about which tanks you could have gone for your main coming into Shadowlands based on what they might be more proficient at. We can see that you can always go for the safe option. You can always go for Brewmaster and Blood Decay. They haven't changed as much. If anything, they have gotten buffed. The risky choice, if you want to go for a risky choice, is going to be Guardian Druid, as I believe it has gotten several buffs and improvements overall. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk about tanks. The next video is going to be about, who knows, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Either healers or half of the ranged or half of the melee DPS. We'll have to see. I don't even know. See you guys.